Hello everyone and welcome to edupediaworld.com. Today again we are going to continue with our chapter 3, that is income not forming part of total income, and today we are going to discuss section 10 subsection 13a, which deals with house rent allowance. This is also a type of allowance which a salaried employee is given by his employer. So in this class we are going to discuss how much of the house rent allowance given by the employer to his employees is exempted and how much is taxable. So let us continue with our class today, in which we will be dealing with the topic of house rent allowance under section 10 subsection 13a. House rent allowance. So what do we mean by house rent allowance? House rent allowance, that is HRA, is given by the employer to the employee to meet the expenses in connection with the rent of the accommodation which the employee might have to take for his residential purpose. So HRA is an allowance which is given by the employer to the employee to meet the expenses in connection with the rent of the accommodation which the employee might have to take for his residential purpose. For example, I have been employed by an employer in Delhi, and I am not a resident of Delhi, so obviously I will have to shift to Delhi and take some place as my accommodation for my residential purpose and have to bear the rent of that. So the company will provide me with the expenses which I have to expend on the rent of the accommodation which I have taken for my residential purpose in Delhi. So that is what is house rent allowance. If the employer is giving me some amount to meet the rent of my accommodation which I have taken for my residential purpose, then those amount or those allowance which the employer, which the company is giving to me to meet my rent, is known as house rent allowance. Got it? What do we mean by house rent allowance? I am an employee. I have been employed by an employer somewhere, and I am taking some place as my accommodation for my residence, and the company is reimbursing me with the rent of that accommodation. So that money which the company or the employer is giving me to meet the rent of my accommodation is the house rent allowance. This house rent allowance, so paid by the employer to his employee, is taxable under the head income from salaries to the extent it is not exempt under section 10 subsection 13a. So this house rent allowance, that is the money which I am getting from the employer to meet the rent expenses of my accommodation, is taxable under the head income from salary to the extent it is not exempt, meaning that the income tax has provided that up to some extent this HRA will be exempted and will not be included in the total income of the employee, and the remaining part after exemption will only be taxable. So in this class we'll study how HRA exemptions are calculated as per different cases, as per different employees. So this is what we mean by HRA, and this is how we'll calculate the taxable HRA. How? HRA received That in that we will deduct the exempted HRA under section 10 subsection 13A, and then after deducting this exempted amount we'll get the taxable HRA of the employee. And in today's class we'll study about this exemption under section 10 subsection 13A, how much HRA is exempted for different categories of employees. The balance amount after claiming HRA exemption would be added in the total salary of the employee and would be taxed as per the income tax slab rates. So it is obvious that if I am deducting the exempted part of HRA from the total HRA received, the balance taxable amount will be added up in the total salary of the employee and would be taxed as per the income tax slab rates. So now let us see how this exemption of HRA is calculated. House rent allowance exempt under section 10 subsection 13A. HRA received is exempt under section 10 subsection 13A to the extent of the minimum of the following three amounts. The minimum of the following three given amounts will be exempt under section 1013A, and the remaining amount after exempting the minimum of these three will be the taxable HRA. So let us see what are the following three conditions regarding the minimum amount exempted in section 10 subsection 13A. Number 1 is actual house rent allowance received by the employee in respect of the relevant period. Number 2 is excess of rent paid for the accommodation occupied by him over 10% of the salary for the relevant period. So, the mathematical expression for this definition will be the rent paid by the employee minus 10% of the salary. That will be the amount over here. That is excess of rent paid for the accommodation occupied over 10% of the salary for the relevant period. So mathematically it will be rent paid for the accommodation minus 10% of the salary for the relevant period. And last and number 3 is 50% of the salary where the residential house is situated in Mumbai, Calcutta, Delhi or Chennai, that is the metros, and 40% of the salary where the house is situated at any other place for the relevant period. So the minimum of these three amounts will be exempted under section 10 subsection 13A. What are the three amounts? Let us see again. Actual HRA received, rent paid for the accommodation minus 10% of the salary, and 50% of the salary if the house is situated in the metros, that is Mumbai, Calcutta, Delhi or Chennai, and 40% of the salary where the house is situated at any other place for the relevant period. This term relevant period is very important for this section because it may happen that the employee may shift to some other place during the year. So we don't calculate this allowance, the exemption of this allowance on annual basis. Rather, we calculate it for a particular period of time when the given conditions remain similar. That is, the salary does not change, the rent does not change, the city does not change, etc. So, if all these conditions given here remains unchanged for the annual period, that is for 1 year, then we can calculate it for 1 year. But if they do change in 1 year, then we have to calculate it differently. Like we have to calculate for one period, that is when it was something else, and for the other period when it was something else. So you get my point. Why this relevant period is important? Because it may happen that the salary may be changed, or the accommodation may be changed, or the place of residence may be changed during the given year. So we don't calculate it annually, rather than we calculate it for a given period when these conditions given do not change. So these are the three conditions, the three amounts, the minimum of which is exempt under section 10 subsection 13A. Now, here are some points which are needed to be kept in mind while calculating the exemption of HRA under section 10 subsection 13A. Let us see what are the given points to remember. Number one is the relevant period means the period during which the said accommodation was occupied by the assessee during the financial year. As I said in the earlier slide that we have to calculate the exemption according to the relevant period, because it may happen that the assessee might have changed his accommodation during one financial year. So we have to be very particular about the relevant period. If the assessee changes his accommodation during 1 year, then we have to calculate HRA separately, that is for the period when the accommodation was different and for the period when he changed his accommodation and moved to some other place of residence. So the relevant period here holds a lot of importance. Number two is salary for this purpose includes dearness allowance, that is DA, if the terms of the employment so provide, but exclude all other allowances and perquisites. This dearness allowance will be included to the extent it is part of salary as per the terms of employment. All other allowances and perquisites will not be included. So this is also a very important point to keep in mind, because as we know and as we have seen in some previous exemptions like gratuity and pension, we have to be very particular about what the term salary includes, because the exemptions are very much dependent upon the salary. In here also, the in the last slide we have seen that the three amounts given, in them the two amounts were dependent on salary of the employee, and those were, number one was rent paid minus 10% of salary, that was one condition, and one condition was 50% of the salary in case of metros and 40% of the salary in case of other cities. So you see that the computation of salary is very important for the computation of exemption of these allowances. In gratuity also we had seen, in pension also we had seen, because all those exemptions were dependent upon the computation of salary. What is included while we say salary? It was different in gratuity, different in pension, and here also it is given that salary will include basic pay. Basic pay is included in every exemption, that is whatever be the case, the basic pay will be included. And here the dearness allowance will be included only if the terms of employment so provide. So if the terms of employment provide that the dearness allowance will form part of the basic pay, or the dearness allowance will form part of the retirement benefits, then only the dearness allowance will be included in the salary, and no other allowances and perquisites will be included for the purpose of calculating exemption of HRA under section 10 subsection 13A. So the computation of salary is very important. You have to keep this in mind, whether it is the computation of exemption of gratuity, or computation of exemption of pension, or computation of exemption of HRA. Now number 3, where the employee has not actually incurred expenditure on payment of rent or stays in his own accommodation, no exemption of HRA is available. So now you see, if I am a resident of Delhi only and I am working in Delhi, so I am living in my own house and I don't need to just rent accommodation for my residential purpose. So in that case, no HRA allowance will be available to me. And number two, if I am not actually incurring expenditure on payment of rent, like due to any case I am not liable to pay the rent of my accommodation, then also the HRA will not be exempted. So these are the two cases in which the HRA will not be exempted. Number one, if I am not actually incurring the expenditure on payment of rent of my accommodation, or if I am staying in my own accommodation and I am not liable to pay any rent for that accommodation, so no exemption of HRA allowance will be available. Lastly, if the rent paid by the employee to his landlord is more than rupees 1 lakh in a year, the PAN card number of the landlord would be required to be furnished. So this is one point which we need to keep in our mind. So these are the points which we have to keep in mind in order to calculate the exemption as per section 10 subsection 13A. Thus, we can see that the house rent allowance exemption is based on the following factors. These are the factors on which the exemption of HRA is dependent. Number one is salary, of course, because amongst the three conditions given, that is the minimum of the three amounts given, two of them is based on salary. Number one was rent paid minus 10% of the salary, and number two was 50% of the salary in case of metros and 40% of the salary in case of other cities. So the salary part plays a very important role in determining the HRA exemption. Number two is place of residence. The place of residence also is a factor on which HRA exemption is based, because if I am residing in the metros, the HRA exemption will be 50% of the salary if it is the minimum amount amongst the three. And if I am residing in other cities, the HRA exemption will be 40% of the salary if that is the minimum amongst the three. The rent paid, of course, is also a factor on which HRA exemption is dependent, because one of the condition was rent paid minus 10% of the salary. So that is also one of the determinant on which the HRA exemption is dependent. And number four, HRA received, because this is also one of the condition, one of the amount on which the exemption is dependent. If that is the minimum amongst the three, then that will be exempted. Now we see that since there is a possibility of change in any of the above factors during the previous year, it may be possible that the above four factors may change during one financial year. So if these change, the exemption for HRA will obviously change, because that is very much dependent on these four factors. So if these factors change, exemption for HRA should not always be calculated on an annual basis. As I've discussed in the previous slide, that it is calculated for a relevant period and not on annual basis, just because it may happen that the above factors determining the exemption of HRA may change during a financial year. So as long as there is no change in any of the above factors, it can be calculated together for that period. And whenever there is a change in any of the above factors, it should be separately calculated till the next change. So this is why it was given that the HRA exemption should be calculated for a relevant period, that is the period when these four factors remain unchanged. And if these four factors change, it should be calculated for one period when these are something else, and for the other period when there has been a change in these four factors. So now let us see one example based on these discussions that we have done on HRA exemption so that we understand this concept of HRA exemption in a more better way. RAM is entitled to a basic salary of rupees 5,000 per month and dentist allowance of rupees 1,000 per month, 40% of which forms part of retirement benefits. So, it is given here that 40% of the DA will form part of the retirement benefit, that is, it will be included in the basic pay of RAM. He is also entitled for HRA of rupees 2,000 per month. He actually pays rupees 2,000 per month as rent for the house in Delhi. So these are the figures given for these questions. Basic pay 5,000, DA 1,000 in which 40% will form part of retirement benefits. HRA given by the employer is 2,000 per month and rent paid for a house in Delhi is rupees 2,000. So based on these figures, let us just calculate the HRA exemption for RAM and the taxable HRA. In the above scenario, we first have to calculate the salary of RAM. Obviously, first of all, the salary is required to be computed because the conditions given for exemption of HRA are very much dependent upon the salary of the employee. So let us first calculate the salary. Basic pay is rupees 5,000 per month, so salary will be 5,000 into 12, that is 60,000, and dearness allowance forming part of retirement benefit, so this 40% only will be included in the salary for the purpose of computation of HRA. So dearness allowance was 1,000 per month, so it will be 12,000 for 1 year, and of that only 40% will be included in the salary of the employee. So 40% of 12,000 is 4,800. We add up these two, that is basic pay and dearness allowance forming part of retirement benefit. So we get total salary for the purpose of computation of HRA as rupees 64,800. Now, the minimum of the following three amounts shall be exempted from tax. The following three amounts, the minimum will be exempted. Number one was HRA actually received. So what was the HRA actually received? 2,000 per month. So 2,000 into 12 will be 24,000 for the whole year. Number two is rent paid in excess of 10% of salary. The rent was 2,000 per month. So for the whole year it will be 2,000 into 12, that is 24,000 minus 10% of salary. And salary for this purpose we have computed as 64,800. So 10% of 64,800 will be 6480. We deduct this 10% of salary from the rent actually paid, that is 24,000, and we get 17,520. Now the third condition was 50% or 40%. Or since here in this case Ram is residing in Delhi, so 50% of the salary. Salary for this purpose is 64,800. So 50% of 64,800 will be 32,400. Now we have to see what is the minimum amongst these three. 24,000, 17,520 and 32,400. Obviously it is B, 17,520, that is rent paid in excess of 10% of salary. Therefore, rupees 17,520 shall be the house rent allowance that is exempted from levy of income tax, and the balance rupees 6480 shall be included in the gross total salary. The total HRA received was 24,000. The exempted HRA is 17,520. So the taxable HRA will be 6480, and this taxable HRA will be included in the gross total salary for the purpose of computation of income tax on it. So hope you have understood this concept of HRA very clearly, how The three conditions are given, what are the important factors determining the exemption, and how the calculations are done. Let us see one more example on the exemption of house rent allowance. It's given over here. Mr. Rajkumar has the following receipts from his employer. Number 1, basic pay 3000 per month, DNS allowance DA 600 per month, commission 6000 per annum, that is per year, motor car for personal use expenditure met by the employer 500 per month, and house rent allowance, that is HRA, given by the employer is 900 per month. So these are the figures given for Mr. Rajkumar. Find out the amount of HRA eligible for exemption to Mr. Rajkumar, assuming that he paid a rent of rupees 1000 per month for his accommodation at Kanpur. It is also given over here that DA forms part of salary for retirement benefits. So these are the particulars given for Mr. Rajkumar. So we have to calculate the amount of HRA eligible for exemption. Let us see the solution. The total HRA received by Mr. Rajkumar is 10,800, that is 900 per month into 12 months, which comes to 10,800. Less exemption under section 1013A 7680. So now we'll see how this 7680 is calculated in note 1. Note 1. Exemption shall be least of the following three limits. The following three amounts given, the least of which will be exempted. Let us see the three amounts one by one. Number 1 is the actual HRA received, that is 900 per month into 12 months is equals to 10,800 for the whole year. Number 2 is excess of the actual rent paid by the assessee over 10% of his salary, which we can mathematically represent as rent actually paid minus 10% of the salary for the relevant period. Here, since the accommodation have not changed in a given year, so the relevant period will equal to 12 months only. So what is the rent paid? The rent paid was 1000 per month. So for the whole year, the rent paid will be 1000 into 12, that is 12,000. And what is 10% of salary? Salary will only include the basic pay and dearness allowance forming part of salary. And it was given in the question that the dearness allowance form part of salary as retirement benefit. So the DA will be included in the salary. So basic pay plus DA, that is 3000 plus 600 into 12, we get the total salary for 1 year, and of that 10%. So 10% of 43,200 is 4320. So rent paid, that is 12,000 minus 10% of salary for the year, that is 4320. We deduct this and we get 7680. And last, number C, 40% of salary. Why 40%? Because he is residing in Kanpur. If he would have resided in the metros, that is Mumbai, Delhi, Kolkata or Chennai, it would have been 50%. So, but since he is residing in Kanpur, it is 40% of the salary. So 40% of the salary of whole year. And what is the salary? 3000 basic pay plus DA forming part of salary, that is 600. So 3000 plus 600, 3600 per month into 12, we get the amount for the whole year, and 40% of that is 17,280. So now we see what is the least amongst these three: 10,800, 7,680 or 17,280. Obviously it is 7680. So that is the amount we deduct from the actual HRA received, and we get the taxable HRA. So now you have understood this concept of HRA very clearly. You just need to remember these three conditions And you just have to remember one more thing, that is salary will include only and only DNS allowance, and that only if the terms of employment so provide, and it will exclude all other allowances and perquisites. In the given question, it was given that the company is also providing motor car to the employee, but that will not be included. The company was also paying commission to Mr. Rajkumar, but that also will not be included in salary for the purpose of computation of exemption of HRA. So this you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind the three limits given, and you have to keep in mind the computation of salary. That is, salary includes only basic and DA, and that DA also will be included only if it is forming part of the basic pay. So this is all about house rent allowance, that under section 10 subsection 13A. Thank you, students. Thank you for watching today's class. Hope you have understood the topic of HRA, and in the next class we'll continue with some more incomes which do not form part of the total income. Thank you.